Well, VIPers, and welcome to another edition of Thirsty Thursday, Women's Online Wellness Facebook page, Facebook Live. Tonight, another special edition, well, all special editions. You know, I hope I don't sound like Fox News. You know, they always come on and say, this is a Fox News special alert. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be anything. Every time they come back from a commercial, it's a Fox News special alert. I hope I'm not sounding like, I mean, I can imagine one day, I'd love to see this one day, them come back from a commercial and say, well, thank you, Steve. Well, wait a minute, we've got a Fox News special alert. Today in Augusta, Georgia, nothing happened. Back to you, Ainsley. I don't want to sound like that. I hope I'm not coming off inauthentic because, believe me, I'm excited to be here. I love being with you guys. It's really special. It gets me juiced because it forces me to look at the news, to examine it, to be able to present it to you in a way that keeps you from going bonkers, from shooting blood out your eyes. Tonight we do have a very, very special interview that I promise you is going to hit, if it hasn't already landed on your website, because of my massive digital presence and my huge network. They're posting this for me as we speak. But anyway, it's a great interview on answering all those questions that you posted a couple of weeks back. Remember back when I was asking if you had any kind of nutritional questions, anything you needed answering about diet and nutrition in the era of COVID, and maybe not even related to COVID, but anything like that. It wasn't just for my own enjoyment to sit up and read in the middle of the night. I actually compiled all those and pulled in an expert, pulled in someone who really knows what they're talking about, a registered dietitian, and I asked those questions and we got them answered. So immediately after you finish watching me tonight, and I promise it's going to be brief, but immediately after you finish that, you should find on your feed, and if you don't, just refresh. I learned this a while back. You got to refresh. You either click out of Facebook and click back in and refresh, and sometimes then it'll show up on your feed. But it's a great interview that's going to answer your questions. And if you have some additional questions that we don't cover, post them on here, and I promise I'll answer them. You know that. You see me do that. I love to answer your questions. I answer every single question. So I enjoy that interaction. I enjoy that getting together to go over that. So please, if we don't answer your questions on this interview, that doesn't mean I didn't like your question. It just means we didn't have time to get to everything. So be sure you watch that after we finish with you today. But I thought I was really trying to get away without talking about a lot of COVID stuff tonight. I'm tired of this stuff, like I know you are, but it's still here, and I've got a confession. My name is Ron, and I'm a COVIDaholic. It started out really simple. It wasn't anything I anticipated. I just found myself 3 or 4 months ago looking at a few news feeds, reading a little bit about COVID, coronavirus. It goes by many names. And I really didn't think much about it. I would never really look at anything before 5. I kept it simple. I found myself looking at a few more sites each night. You know, I'd get a little bored and I'd start looking at more and more sites. And I found out that after a while, it took more news feeds about COVID, more articles, more studies to kind of get the same effect. So it just kind of escalated every night. I mean, I was smart about it. I never looked at all that the night before surgery or the night I was on call, but I found myself needing more and more, and it just wasn't as satisfying, and I even found myself forgetting things and not remembering to do things. I got caught up and I didn't even know where the time had gone, and before you know it, I realized that I'd hit rock bottom. I'd spent hours on hours. What started simply as just a curiosity now has turned into a full monkey on my back, or maybe virus on my back's a better way of describing it. So I'm probably going to get into a 12-step program to try to break this habit. I know it's not all about me. I know I have to give up and give in. The last time I did the Serenity Prayer, well, I'm really applying that to my COVIDaholism. But I preface all that by saying that I promised a no COVID night tonight, but you're just going to have to enable me. You guys are my enablers. You're allowing me to present some of this COVID stuff that I just can't stop. Not right now. I haven't hit rock bottom. I'm not ready to give it up. I'm not ready to stop yet. So I'm going to keep fueling you with COVID information. Even tonight, when I promised a COVID-free zone, you're still going to get some stuff on COVID because it makes me nuts when I see some of this stuff that's out there. And my job is to clarify, to sanctify, to testify, to tell you exactly what's true when it comes to all this massive amount of information out there. So, before we get to our interview with Stephanie Kolb, our registered dietitian, let me throw a couple of things at you, even though you know in your heart you're enabling this addiction. I saw a study, and I thought this was so cool for Augusta, GA in particular. I saw a study 2 days ago out of the Netherlands about COVID. Now, my first place my mind went is great. That's all we need to know is a story about the effect of windmills on COVID. I mean, no, don't kid me, you mine went there too. I mean, it's terrible to think that a national identity is wrapped up in 18th century water pumps and very uncomfortable shoes. But the reality is this study came out and it immediately caught my eye because the headline said, very high likelihood that pollen may interfere with the spread of COVID-19. I started doing my happy dance because Augusta, Georgia is the pollen capital of the known world. I mean, when most people are sitting out on their porch enjoying their margaritas and their oysters, Augusta is being blanketed in this yellow pollen from hell. We have so much pollen here, it's almost just expected to be a part. I mean, you just, nobody cares anymore when they walk out and see their cars coated in yellow dust. Well, this study out of the Netherlands said that there's evidence that the higher the pollen count in an area, the less infection rate for both influenza and COVID-19. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, they think that because it's an airborne, because it's just spread by droplets and even some micro aerosols, the higher the pollen count, it actually acts as somewhat of a little barrier. It's like putting more junk between you and the virus. So there's evidence that in high pollen count areas, there may be a decreased spread. In addition, we know that if you live in a high pollen area, it tends to stimulate your immune system. People who have allergies have them because their immune system is working in overdrive. That's where you get the results of the symptoms. So it only makes sense that if you have an overdrive immune system, and it can kick in and help you block some of these viral infestations, it's a great thing. So I just was so excited. I had to share it. That's literally hot off the press, straight from Dutchland. There might be some benefit to this yellow blanket from hell that we get every year. Next thing, I saw an article the other day about blood types and COVID-19. There's information out there that says that a person's blood type may or may not play a role in the likelihood of you becoming infected. In particular, people with O blood type seem to be less likely to be infected by COVID-19. Now, here's the rest of the story. This was put out by the company 23andMe. As most of you know, that's a huge company that does genetic testing. And they do some great stuff, and there's some wonderful information. I've done it. My wife's done it. We're going to get it for our kids. It's really kind of fun. And if you do it, there are other sites that can take that data and actually plug it into additional algorithms and really tell you something meaningful other than the fact that you have 15% Asian blood or 25% African blood, or you're more closely related to an Alaskan Malamute than you are to somebody from South America, whatever. You can actually get some meaningful data from that. But the company compiled this massive data bank, so whenever you do 23andMe, they ask, can we use your information anonymously, wink, wink, to do these studies? Well, one of these studies they came out with was about this type O blood based on their surveys. Here's the problem. This is a perfect example of the difference between a cause and an association. They did not show that there was some type of causality in your blood type that would protect you. It simply was gathering data and showing that there was possibly an association. Let me make the differentiation for you. Say we took 1,000 people with breast cancer, and I called every one of them up and did a survey with each one of them and asked them, let's see, do you eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and do you exercise? And then I compiled that data, and if I happen to find that there were more people that have breast cancer that eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches than exercise, then the headlines the next day say, stay away from peanut butter and jelly because it's associated with an increased risk for breast cancer. Well, of course, that's absurd. No, it isn't. There may be an association, but there's absolutely no physiological reason for peanut butter and jelly to cause breast cancer. I mean, all that's going to do is send the peanut butter producers into a tailspin, the economy goes down, and we get another apocalypse. So there's a big difference between saying something is associated with something and saying something causes or is a reason for that. This is a classic example. If you are type O, good on you. You're the universal donor. But you are not immune from COVID-19 by any stretch. There are millions of people with type O blood who have contracted COVID-19. Probably what we are seeing and what might explain the discrepancy in the infectivity rate is there's no question that there is some type of genetic predisposition towards a person's susceptibility to any type of infection. So there may be some what we call single nucleotide polymorphisms that may be associated with a certain blood type, and that in turn may make that particular individual a little bit less susceptible. But don't feel like you're in the clear just because you have a certain blood type. Quite honestly, this is the same kind of garbage that we used to see with diet. People would call it, I forget what they used to call it, the blood type diet, that you were supposed to eat this way to stay healthy if you have this blood type. I can tell you, that's garbage. There's no scientific evidence that has any kind of basis other than someone who's trying to sell you a diet program. Beside the point. Just understand that you need to assume you have the same risk as everybody else. The second thing that I want to comment on is all the information out there right now on vitamin D and supposedly the protection against COVID-19. Again, here we have a very key necessity to read past the headlines. A lot of times you're flipping through the internet. I would say flipping through the paper, but nobody flips through the paper anymore. But you're on your news feed, you're flipping through the news, and you see something about vitamin D helps protect against COVID-19, or vitamin D makes COVID-19 less worse, or vitamin D does whatever. Here's the bottom line. Most of the information about vitamin D and COVID-19 actually goes back to the fact that vitamin D is critical when it comes to a proper immune system functioning. let's think about this for a minute. We know that 60% of adults in the U.S. are either very low on vitamin D or actually deficient. We know people in the higher latitudes, the Canadians, the Norwegians, the Icelandiers, they even have a higher incidence of a vitamin D deficiency because we get vitamin D from the sunlight. So the weaker the sunlight or the less we're out, the lower our vitamin D levels. Of course, we get them nutritionally also. Vitamin D is critically important in a number of body processes, including bones, sleep, concentration, moods, immune system. If your vitamin D is deficient, your immune system is not going to work very effective. Remember we talked about those white blood cells who are out, little Pac-Men, they're going around eating up all the bad stuff? Well, without vitamin D, they're going around going, meh, meh, meh. So they're not nearly as effective, not nearly as efficient. So what we're seeing is it's not taking vitamin D that's actually protecting you against COVID-19. It's those individuals who are taking vitamin D, chances are, were deficient in vitamin D to start with. So indeed, if you're like the majority of the population and you're deficient, you're more likely to get it. So by taking vitamin D, you're not actually doing anything other than getting your system functioning better as it should be, and that's what is protective. So I think there was a little bit of disconnect between why that evidence is showing there may be some benefit. I really think the majority of folks over 50 in particular who, well, even if you have a good diet, chances are you probably ought to at least get a vitamin D level checked and probably supplement vitamin D. Because the majority of us now are very bright and we go out and we sit on the beach for 8 hours and we coat ourselves in sunscreen, which you should, because melanoma is not a walk in the park. But what also happens is that decreases your vitamin D level. So a lot of us out there walking around are low in vitamin D, so it doesn't hurt. Now it's a fat-soluble vitamin, meaning that you can't just take gobs and gobs and gobs of it because there's side effects. It'll be stored in the tissues. Unlike vitamin C, which you'll just pee out all if you take too much. You could take a gallon of vitamin C and you're just going to have really yellow urine for a long time. You can't do that with vitamin D. You got to be careful about that because it can build up in your system. Now there's a huge area of safety there. I don't mean to insinuate that you're going to take 3 tablets of vitamin D instead of 2 and you're going to OD on vitamin D. No, there's a huge safety valve there. But it is something that probably should be tested and probably should be directed by your doctor as far as how to supplement that. So hopefully that clears up why it's helpful in COVID. It's not a direct effect, it's an indirect effect on getting you working up to the immune system that it should be. Finally, my last bit of COVIDaholic rambling before we get to the interview, and that is this craziness talking about asymptomatic carriers and whether or not those folks can spread the disease versus not spread the disease as much. The WHO, who we've all grown to just love, came out, well actually they didn't come out, it was one of their scientists, one of the people higher up in the WHO came out with a statement the other day saying that it was rare, that's the term she used, rare for asymptomatic people to spread the virus. Now that's real important because we know if somebody's coughing up their lung, if they're going out and they've got 118 fever, we know those people need to be isolated because they're spreading the virus. They're spewing virus like Mount Vesuvius. So we understand we've got to keep those people isolated and away from everybody. But if you're just tooling around normally, what we call asymptomatic, but you've got the virus, those are the folks that are going to show up in the grocery store and show up in the ice cream store and show up at church. So if it turns out that those people can rarely spread the virus, then that's a good thing. That's more evidence for not being so anxious about this. But that's not the case. That's not really what she was saying. She came back and clarified that because people were freaking out when they heard that, because that was kind of going against what a lot of the other evidence was. A quick differentiation in terminology. Asymptomatic means somebody who has the virus but has absolutely no symptoms. There's no way by looking at them or examining them you can tell that they have the virus. We know those people are out there because we're doing the antibody testing. Before we were only testing the nasal swabs for people who are actually symptomatic. So if you were, going to bowling practice and not, ignoring all this stuff and asymptomatic, you weren't even tested. People didn't even bother testing you. So you could have been asymptomatic, and the only way of knowing it is the antibody test down the road. So we know that there are those out there that fit that category. Here's what's freaky. The data indicates estimates between 9 and 40% of people may be asymptomatic infectious. Now that's like saying, that range is just absurd. How can you base anything on a range that basically that says anywhere from we don't know to we don't have a clue? And those are the folks that could be asymptomatic shedders, is what we call them. So we don't even have a clue at this point who falls in that category. We probably won't know for months, if not years, how many people are actually walking around out there that have the virus that have no symptoms. Now that's different from what we call pre-symptomatic people. Those are people who have the virus. It's a couple of days before they start running the fever. It's a couple of days before they start coughing or having shortness of breath. They're gonna do it. If you had your crystal ball, you could say in a couple of days you're gonna feel like crap. But those are what we call pre-symptomatic. Now there is some evidence that those people are much more likely to spread the virus than the asymptomatic people. But here's what makes blood shoot out my eyes. There's no way to tell that beforehand. There's no way to predict who's going to be what. So what's the bottom line? The bottom line is just do what we've always said we needed to do. Wash your hands. If you're symptomatic, stay home. There's no way we're going to have that kind of data, that kind of answer to those kind of questions. And it's really kind of a moot point. It's not really going to change our behavior. The reality is we're not going to be able to say that because this, like anything else, takes time to be resolved. So just understand that people talking about asymptomatic shedding and pre-symptomatic shedding and whether it's going to be infectious or not, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter right now because it's not going to affect how you need to behave. It's not going to affect how you need to talk to your family about doing the things that we've been doing. So it's just one more thing not to worry about. Bottom line. Bottom line. We're all about bottom lines here. All right, that's all. I've maxed out my COVIDaholic titer. I can't talk any more about COVID tonight because I promised I wasn't, and yet here I've run on for 24 minutes about it. Go figure. Like I said, I've got a habit, I've got a kick. I've got to start my 12-step program, and hopefully by the end of August I'll be clean and sober for this COVIDaholism. So, what you do now before you run off and either eat dinner or make dinner or whatever you're planning on doing, refresh your feed and look at the interview with Stephanie Kolb to get all your nutrition and diet questions answered. If you've got additional questions that we don't get to, put them on the feed. I'll get to them. I'll answer them. We've got some great stuff coming up. Again, we're kind of expanding what we're doing here. We're trying to reach out and provide as much information and entertainment and make it worth your while. I really respect you for taking even this 25 minutes to give me that time. I'm humbled that you would give me that time of what is a very, very important life, and I get that, and I appreciate that, and it's not lost on me that you're taking the time to watch this and to comment. And it keeps me going. It keeps me wanting to continue to do this, to try to provide value to you, try to provide some clarity in this confusing spectrum of viral soup that's out there. So I greatly appreciate it. If there's other folks that you think might benefit from this, again, please submit them. I'd love to have them be a part of this. And let me reiterate what I said last week. There's so many of these videos that are out there now. We're putting them on our YouTube channel. So a lot of people had asked, if you're not a member of the Facebook group but you want to see the videos, the links are on the feed there to send them to the YouTube channel so they can see these videos if you feel like it'd be helpful. So let me know, comment, let me know if we're providing value, let me know if there's something you want to know, that's something we can add to this, a particular person that you might want to hear from, anything that we can do to add value to this. That's my goal. So I do appreciate you being with us tonight. So until next week, next week, make healthy choices. See you then.